Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program Islam Explained. I'd like to welcome Dr. Zuleyha Keskin.
Thank you.
Dr. Zuleyha, could I ask the question of is dua a form of worship? And if so, if yes, what is its significance?
First of all, let's just clarify what dua is for those who may not know its meaning. It means either supplication or personal prayer. So is it a form of worship? I guess before we answer that question, let's look at what the meaning or definition of worship is. Worship, which means ibadah in Arabic, has a number of meanings. As a general meaning, or I guess the more traditional meaning would be to fulfill the commandments of God and to abstain from things that He has asked us not to. So basically fulfilling the commandments of God. But this has been taken into a broader definition, which is where anything that you do that pleases God is considered to be worship. And for this reason, Imam Shafi says that a student's sleep is considered to be worship, because when you think about it, he needs to sleep so he can have the energy to continue to be a student of God, and therefore that is seen as a pleasing act for God. So this really broadens the horizon when we think about what worship is. But with dua, it's again an element of it that we need to remember is it's remembering who your Creator is, the one who can answer and respond to your needs, and acknowledging that you are the servant of God, asking of Him. So when you think of it that way, it is actually a great worship. It is an amazing type of worship, and there is a hadith that actually says dua is worship. It clearly spells it out to us and tells us that dua is worship. It is ibadah. So there is, in that sense, no doubt that it is, but I think there is something very special about worship, there's something very special about dua, and that is that we make some of the most amazing duas when we are at our lowest. And one of the key aspects of worship is that you acknowledge your need, you acknowledge your impotence, and you acknowledge God's power and His greatness. So, and think about it, think in your life, when you made that dua that you still remember today, it would be those duas at your lowest, and you had this amazing connection. So in that sense, dua is a worship that brings us closer to God in an amazing way. The other part of the question which you asked is its significance. I just mentioned, I guess it's significant because it, highlights our need for God, but it also, dua has a lot of implications. By making dua to God, you're basically saying, oh God, you are the only one that can respond to my needs. You are the only one who can fulfill my needs. Oh God, you are the only one that I ask of and no one else. So in a way, it's really reinforcing that notion of tawheed, monotheism, because you're ultimately saying, Allah, you have control, or you have influence over everything, and that's why I come to you, because you can make everything else work, and that's why I'm referring this matter to you. Another, I guess, as I said, it highlights our servanthood, and that really humbles the ego, because even in the human domain, it's not always easy to ask of people, because when you ask of someone something, you're basically saying, I need you for this. I need your help for this. So when you ask of God, you're basically saying, oh God, I need you. I need you to help me with this because I can't do it myself. So this is a very humbling effect, which has a positive effect on our ego, which usually wants to just blow it up and think it doesn't need anything, doesn't need anyone. But so you're putting your ego in its place by making dua. Dua is also a means of overcoming what we call ghafla, heedlessness. Because if you're making dua, you can't be heedless of God. You can't be in a state of ghafla. So imagine, the more a person is making dua throughout the day, the more they're thinking about God. So it's a pretty straight correlation that exists between the two. So there we can see at least three things, three major implications. One is your acknowledgement that God is all-powerful, that He is the one in control of everything, and which brings us to the notion of tawheed, monotheism. We are acknowledging our servanthood, which is humbling our ego, and 3, it is taking us out of the state of heedlessness.
It clearly does mention that Allah does respond to his servant's call, which is in Surah 40 verse 60. But there are some people that say that I keep asking and I don't have any response, I don't get anything, and yet they always say I am always asking for certain things and I never receive it. How do we respond to these questions?
That's a good question, and it's one that's commonly asked. I have to say that there are sometimes questions like that asked because we simplify concepts too much. And when you look at the notion of dua, you see that it has been simplified. But that aside note, your question of does Allah respond to all our du'as in one way or another? But sometimes it's not the type of response that we were expecting. And this is out of His mercy and wisdom. We have to acknowledge that as well. And this is where knowledge of God is so important. If we know Him as the knowledgeable, the wise, the just, we know that He's going to respond to our dua with what is best for us. And if we give an example in our worldly domain of how this may play out, think of a patient that goes to a doctor. You go to a doctor and you say, "Doctor, I've got a sore throat. I believe I've got a bacterial infection and I would like to get antibiotics." And they even spell out the antibiotics. They say, "I want amoxicillin." And the doctor does a bit of a checkup, and there are 3 possible, maybe more, but 3 possible scenarios. One is, yes, you're right, it's a bacterial infection, and I need to give you antibiotics. And yes, amoxicillin is the correct one, and gives it. The second option is the doctor may look and say, well, it's actually not a bacterial infection, it's actually a fungal infection, so I need to give you an antifungal. So I'm not going to give you exactly what you need, but I am going to respond to your need by giving you this particular medication. The third one, which the possible response is, you've actually got a viral infection. Antibiotics don't do anything for viral infections, and therefore I'm not going to give you any medication. You need to go home, do lots of rest, and drink plenty of fluids, something that a lot of us have heard when we went to the doctor. So in this scenario, it would actually be not right if the doctor gave this patient an antibiotic knowing that this patient had a viral infection, because the antibiotic will do nothing for that viral infection. So we need to think about dua in that, from that respect. When we ask of something, we ask with the intention that we think it's what we want and what we need, but what comes our way, we need to accept that. And when we think of it from that perspective, then we are happy with whatever comes our way. I've experienced 2 things this last week where this came to my mind. Imagine your child comes to you at 10 p.m. at night and says, "Mom, I want chocolate." You can say, well, I'm going to respond to every single need of my child and give them chocolate. But deep down, that's not the right thing to do. So you either might give them milk, or you might say, "Sorry, go to bed." And this isn't because you hate them. This isn't because you're not responding to their needs. It's because you're doing what's right by them, keeping in mind what they want of you. But that's one perspective. Another thing that happened to me is, my daughter messaged me and she said, "Mom, I want this chocolate during the day. Can you get it for me?" I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll get it on my way home." And then my son said, "Oh, why didn't you get me anything? Or why didn't you get the chocolate that I wanted?" And I said, "But you didn't ask." So sometimes I think we fall into that trap too. If you ask, you'll get a response. We often, don't realize the value of dua. And there is a hadith that sees dua like a weapon. And so when you think of a weapon, if it's just sitting on your side and you're not using it, what's the use of having it? Whereas if you know it's there and you know to use it whenever the opportunity arises, then that's where you're really benefiting from dua. So it really is a tool that we do not utilize enough of. And when we do utilize it, we should be open to the responses we're going to get. But Allah does respond to our duas, as mentioned in chapter 40, verse 16.
Thank you, Dr. Zuleyha, for giving those examples and those analogies about the doctor example and even the personal examples you've given about the importance of making dua and consistently making those duas as well. So I'd like to thank our viewers again for joining in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.